Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling ever so slightly. My son. My baby boy. The words didn't make sense. I read them again. And again. Don't come. My wife doesn't want to see you. No punctuation could capture the sting of that simple sentence. My mind raced, the disbelief, the shock, the sudden ache in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know whether to cry, to scream, or to simply sink to the floor. It felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. How had it come to this? How could a day that should have been filled with love, laughter, and family become the most isolating moment of my life? That night, after dinner and the usual quiet in the living room, Ethan's name lit up on my phone. At first, I smiled. Maybe he was sending a funny meme, a sweet note, something that reminded me of our bond. But the smile faded instantly as I read the words. Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you. The simplicity of it made it sting even more. No explicación. No apology. No hint of regret. Just a cold, factual statement that implied rejection, finality, and something I couldn't yet name, betrayal. I sat down slowly on the couch, gripping the armrests. My mind felt like it had been splintered into 1,000 pieces. The living room around me, familiar, safe, filled with memories of Ethan's childhood, suddenly felt alien. The family photos on the walls, the little trinkets I had collected over the years, all seemed to mock me. Was I invisible? That night, after dinner and the usual quiet in the living room, Ethan's name lit up on my phone. At first, I smiled. Maybe he was sending a funny meme, a sweet note, something that reminded me of our bond. But the smile faded instantly as I read the words. Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you. The simplicity of it made it sting even more. No explicación. No apology. No hint of regret. Just a cold, factual statement that implied rejection, finality, and something I couldn't yet name, betrayal. I sat down slowly on the couch, gripping the armrests. My mind felt like it had been splintered into 1,000 pieces. The living room around me, familiar, safe, filled with memories of Ethan's childhood, suddenly felt alien. The family photos on the walls, the little trinkets I had collected over the years, all seemed to mock me. Was I invisible? I wanted to respond immediately, to demand an explanation, to plead, to reason. But I didn't. I sat there in silence, letting the shock wash over me. Each heartbeat felt like a drum, echoing the growing pain in my chest. Questions swirled. Had I done something wrong? Had my attempts to guide him or express concern somehow become unbearable to him? Or was it simply that Laura, his fiancée, had convinced him I wasn't welcome in this pivotal moment of his life? The truth was I didn't know. And that uncertainty was worse than any definitive answer could have been. I realized something in that moment. Control as a parent is often an illusion. No matter how much love, effort, or care you pour into a child, they will make choices that surprise, hurt, or even anger you. And sometimes, those choices will cut deeper than you ever imagined. I thought back to his childhood. The sleepless nights, the school plays, the scraped knees I had kissed better. The teenage years filled with awkward silences and angry words that now seem trivial compared to this moment. I remembered teaching him how to ride his bike, his first heartbreak, the way he used to laugh at my terrible jokes. It was ironic in a bitter way, how the years of shared moments, laughter, tears, arguments, apologies, now seemed almost irrelevant compared to one short text. One message had the power to erase decades of connection, or at least make them feel fragile and distant. I closed my phone without replying. My fingers lingered over the screen for a moment, tempted to type out something. Anything, but I resisted. There was nothing to say that would change his mind tonight. My emotions demanded action, but my heart understood the value of restraint. In that silence, I found a strange clarity. I realized that responding out of anger or desperation would only give power to the hurt. By choosing not to respond, I wasn't surrendering. I was preserving my dignity, my composure, and the possibility for healing in the future. Sometimes the strongest statement is silence. Sometimes the most courageous act is stepping back and letting life unfold as it will, rather than forcing outcomes. I didn't know what the next days would hold. Would Ethan regret his words? Would family dynamics shift, implode, or mend? All I knew was that my journey was just beginning. A journey to navigate heartbreak, maintain boundaries, and discover a strength I hadn't fully recognized in myself. What started as a shocking rejection became a quiet turning point, one that would ultimately teach me more about love, resilience, and the sometimes painful realities of parenthood than any of the joyful milestones ever could. As I sat there in the dim light of the living room, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, I realized that life rarely follows the script we imagine. And sometimes, the most painful messages carry within them the seeds of transformation, if we are brave enough to face them. I didn't know the full story yet, but I knew this. I would not let this moment define me. I would not let a single message erase a lifetime of love. And above all, I would find a way to navigate the heartbreak without losing myself in the process. The morning after I received the message, the house felt different. Every sound, every light, every shadow seemed sharper, heavier. The text from Ethan replayed endlessly in my mind. Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I made my way to the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, and paused as I stared at the steam rising from the mug. The aroma, usually comforting, felt hollow. I had always associated the kitchen with warmth, laughter, and shared moments with Ethan, especially during holidays and weekend breakfasts. Today, it reminded me of absence and rejection. I tried to reach out to a few close relatives, not to vent but to seek clarity, advice, or even a comforting word. My sister answered the phone first. "You heard the text?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to do." There was a long pause. "You have to stay strong," she finally said. "Sometimes children make choices we don't understand. Sometimes it's not about you. It's about their world, their priorities." Her words were meant to comfort, but they cut strangely. Not because they were wrong, but because they were true. I had to accept that Ethan and Laura had created a new life, one in which my presence was, at least for now, unwelcome. All day, my mind replayed every moment I had shared with Ethan. I thought about the day he was born, how tiny and fragile he had been in my arms. I remembered the nights I stayed awake with him, soothing his cries, feeling a love so overwhelming it often brought tears to my eyes. How could all that intimacy be overshadowed by a simple text? Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I refused to let it dominate me. Instead, I focused on understanding. I asked myself difficult questions. Had I been too critical? Too protective? Too involved? Could my concerns or past disagreements have pushed him toward this decision? The answers weren't simple. Parenting, I realized, was never straightforward. Love didn't always guarantee harmony, and devotion didn't always secure respect. And yet, in that challenge, I found the first seeds of resilience. I couldn't control Ethan's decisions, but I could control how I responded, how I carried myself in the face of rejection. I wrote letters I never sent. In them, I poured my love, disappointment, hopes, and fears. It was my way of speaking without confrontation, of releasing emotions without causing harm. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I realized something profound. The pain I felt wasn't just about exclusion. It was about the natural evolution of relationships, about the bittersweet transition from parent to observer in an adult child's life. The realization was liberating. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't control Ethan's choices. But I could shape my own actions, my own emotions, and my own sense of self-worth. I decided, in that moment, that the coming days would not be defined by resentment or passive suffering. They would be defined by dignity, love, and quiet strength. My son may have asked me not to attend, but that didn't diminish the love I held for him. It only challenged me to express that love differently, with patience, with empathy, and with boundaries intact. As the wedding approached, invitations were finalized, RSVPs counted, and families prepared for celebration. But in my home, there was a different kind of preparation, an internal, emotional one. I was learning to navigate heartbreak gracefully, to maintain composure when confronted with hurt, and to understand that true love sometimes requires letting go of control. I knew the coming days would test me further. I didn't know if Ethan would regret his decision, if reconciliation was possible, or if this would permanently reshape our relationship. But I felt a quiet determination growing within me, a determination to remain true to myself, even in the face of rejection. The days after that text were not easy, but they were transformative. I discovered reserves of patience, strength, and clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I learned that silence can be a shield, that reflection can be a form of self-care, and that love doesn't always demand proximity or approval. As I looked out the window at the changing seasons, I realized that life doesn't pause for heartbreak. It continues, inexorably, often challenging us to grow in ways we never expected. And in that growth, I found a glimmer of hope. A hope that one day, my son and I might bridge the distance. But until then, I would walk my path with dignity, courage, and unwavering love. The day of Ethan and Laura's wedding arrived with all the pomp and ceremony one could imagine. Invitations had gone out weeks prior, decorations were set, and guests began to arrive, buzzing with excitement. For many, it was a day of joy, laughter, and celebration. For me, it was a day of quiet tension, emotional endurance, and careful navigation. I woke up that morning with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. A part of me longed to be part of the celebration, to watch my son take such a monumental step in life. Yet another part of me remembered the text that had started this emotional whirlwind. "Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you." The words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the fragile line I was walking. How could I celebrate a moment I had been explicitly excluded from? How could I reconcile my love for my son with the sting of rejection from both him and the woman he chose to marry? I spent the morning reflecting quietly. I poured my energy into simple tasks, preparing a breakfast I barely ate, arranging my outfit, making sure every detail of my presence, should it be necessary, would reflect dignity and grace. I was determined that my absence would not be a dramatic protest, nor would my presence be an emotional storm. I practiced deep breathing, reminding myself that control was internal, not external. I couldn't control Ethan's choices or Laura's opinions, but I could control how I responded. I could choose peace over anger, love over resentment, and calm over chaos. Driving to the wedding venue felt surreal. Streets were filled with other guests, all seemingly unaware of the emotional weight I carried. My mind alternated between anxiety and hope. What if Ethan's decision had softened? What if there was still a chance for reconciliation? A smile, a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared. I arrived early, parking my car at a distance. I stepped out, inhaling deeply, feeling the cool morning air on my face. The sounds of the venue, laughter, clinking glasses, snippets of conversation, hit me like waves, a reminder of both inclusion and exclusion. I chose to observe quietly at first. I didn't want to force interactions or cause discomfort. I watched families greet each other, couples laugh, and friends embrace. Each scene was a mirror of the happiness I wanted for Ethan. Yet each moment carried a quiet sting. I wasn't part of it. I noticed Laura moving gracefully, interacting with guests, her smile radiant but somewhat guarded. And there was Ethan, my son, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, smiling, laughing, seemingly carefree. My heart ached with longing, pride, and an undeniable sense of loss. Eventually, some family members noticed me standing alone. My sister approached first, giving me a supportive smile and a gentle nod. "You're here," she whispered. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and tension. Small interactions like this reminded me that I wasn't entirely invisible, that love and support still existed even amid rejection. Guests began to notice me more as the ceremony drew near. Whispers followed, subtle glances, some curious, others sympathetic. I reminded myself not to react, not to engage in explanations or justifications. My presence alone was my statement, a quiet declaration of dignity, love, and resilience. When the ceremony started, my heart beat rapidly. I watched Ethan take his place at the altar. He looked handsome, confident, and full of anticipation. I felt pride, yes, but also an underlying sadness. The bittersweet feeling of witnessing your child's milestone from the edges of inclusion. The music swelled, guests stood, and Laura walked down the aisle. I took a deep breath, observing quietly. Every step she took toward my son was both a joy and a pang. The ceremony unfolded as expected. Vows were exchanged. Rings were presented, promises made. I clapped along, smiled when appropriate, and kept my composure intact, all while my mind wrestled with the complex mixture of emotions. Midway through the ceremony, a small, unexpected moment occurred. Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd briefly, landing somewhere near me. I caught a flicker of recognition, hesitation, perhaps even regret. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a silent acknowledgement that the bond we shared had not completely vanished. That brief moment reminded me of something crucial. Relationships are rarely defined by a single act of exclusion. Bonds forged through decades of love, care, and shared experiences do not dissolve instantly. They may bend, fracture, or shift, but they endure in ways that are subtle and profound. At the reception, I remained largely on the sidelines. I allowed myself to enjoy small interactions, catching up with relatives, exchanging pleasantries with old friends, and savoring the delicious food prepared for the event. I focused on presence rather than intrusion, observation rather than confrontation. I noticed that Laura, initially distant, began to relax slightly as she interacted with the extended family. My subtle respect for her space seemed to ease tensions. She never directly approached me, but I sensed a softening in the air, a realization that my presence was not a threat, just an expression of love and dignity. As the evening wore on, I found a quiet corner and allowed myself to reflect. The day had been emotional, complex, and at times painful, but I realized something important. I had survived. I had maintained composure in a situation that could have easily led to conflict, embarrassment, or heartbreak. More than that, I had learned about the strength of patience, the power of silence, and the enduring nature of love. I saw clearly that being excluded did not diminish my value or my love for Ethan. It simply challenged me to express that love in a different, more resilient way. By the end of the day, the wedding had concluded with smiles, congratulations, and well wishes. Ethan and Laura had begun their life together, and I had begun a different journey, one of understanding, acceptance, and emotional growth. Ethan had chosen his path and I had chosen mine. A path defined by quiet strength, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the enduring bonds of family. And as I drove home that night, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and pride. The day had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative. I understood in that moment that true love often requires stepping back, that dignity can be more powerful than confrontation, and that the lessons of heartbreak can teach resilience far greater than the comforts of unconditional acceptance. The days following Ethan and Laura's wedding were quieter than I expected. The grand ceremony, the laughter, the music, and the applause had all faded, leaving behind a calm but emotionally complex reality. Life seemed to move forward for everyone. The newlyweds settling into their routines, relatives sharing stories about the celebration, and friends replaying moments of joy. Yet for me, there remained a lingering ache, a reminder of the distance that had been imposed by that short but piercing text. I found myself reflecting on the meaning of family, love, and the boundaries we sometimes must maintain to protect our hearts. The text, "Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you," had been a catalyst. It had forced me to confront not just rejection, but also the nature of control, pride, and patience. I realized that my emotional response, while inevitable, could be shaped into something constructive rather than destructive. Friends and relatives reached out over the following days, some expressing curiosity, others offering support. Many asked the same question: "How did you feel being excluded?" I answered truthfully but with measured calm. "It was difficult, of course," I said, "but I realized that sometimes love requires stepping back. It doesn't mean I care any less, it means I have to respect boundaries." Some were surprised by my composure. Others, who had expected anger or confrontation, were relieved to see that dignity could prevail over resentment. In that realization, I felt a quiet sense of empowerment. I was reclaiming agency over my own emotions. Even if I could not influence the choices of others, I spent hours thinking about Ethan's decision. Why had he done it? Was it purely Laura's influence? Or had he genuinely felt that I should be absent? I knew it wasn't easy being caught between loyalty to a spouse and love for a parent. Adults must make choices that align with their lives, even if those choices hurt the people they care about. It was a difficult truth to accept. Love doesn't always translate into agreement or approval. Sometimes, the ones we love make choices that are painful for us but necessary for their own growth. The realization was sobering, but it also became a source of clarity and emotional maturity. In the weeks after the wedding, I began to notice changes within myself. The heartbreak had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and to cultivate resilience. I engaged in activities that had been neglected: long walks, reading, journaling, and quiet meditation. These small, intentional acts nurtured a sense of inner peace. I also learned to accept that my presence wasn't required to validate love or family. Love can exist without constant affirmation, and relationships can endure even when boundaries are tested. In fact, respecting those boundaries often strengthens bonds in ways confrontation cannot. Ethan reached out briefly a week after the wedding. A simple text, hesitant and cautious, expressing hope that I was well. I responded in kind, warmly but neutrally, not letting past hurt dictate my tone. Our exchange was short, but it carried significance. It was a bridge, tentative, fragile, yet present. It reminded me that even after rejection, reconciliation is possible if approached with patience, humility, and understanding. I realized that my initial choice to remain silent after the wedding had not been passive. It had been strategic. It had allowed the emotions to settle, the pride to calm, and the door to remain open for eventual reconnection. Over the following months, small shifts began to occur. Ethan became more communicative, occasionally sharing updates about their new life. Laura, initially guarded, began to recognize that my presence could coexist with their happiness without threat. I approached these moments with care. I didn't try to force closeness or manipulate feelings. Instead, I offered genuine interest, quiet support, and consistent respect for boundaries. These subtle actions began to mend what had been temporarily fractured, demonstrating that relationships can be nurtured through patience and respect rather than demands or ultimatums. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized several truths. Love is not control. No amount of devotion can dictate another person's choices. True love respects autonomy. Silence can be powerful. Choosing when to speak, and when not to, can preserve dignity and prevent unnecessary conflict. Boundaries are essential. Respecting emotional and physical boundaries is as much a gift to oneself as it is to others. Resilience grows from pain. Heartbreak, when processed mindfully, can strengthen character, empathy, and patience. Reconnection is possible. Even after rejection, bridges can be rebuilt with care, consistency, and compassion. These lessons reshaped my understanding of family and love. I learned to love without needing constant acknowledgement, to step back without surrendering, and to remain emotionally available while protecting my own well-being. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. I still thought of Ethan frequently, and I remained a quiet presence in the background of his life, offering support without interference. The initial sting of the wedding text had softened into a profound lesson about the complexity of human relationships. The pain had not disappeared entirely. It never truly does, but it had been transformed into wisdom, perspective, and strength. I had endured one of the most emotionally challenging experiences of my life and emerged not bitter, but resilient and reflective. In the end, the journey taught me that love and family are not always about proximity, agreement, or approval. They are about patience, understanding, and the courage to honor both our own hearts and the choices of those we love. Ethan and Laura's marriage continued, and so did my life, intertwined yet independent. I remained a mother who loved deeply, understood boundaries, and valued dignity over drama. That one text, initially so devastating, became a turning point. A moment that reshaped my understanding of love, resilience, and the strength required to navigate life's most painful transitions. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come wrapped in rejection. Sometimes, the most meaningful growth begins with heartbreak. And sometimes, love endures not through control or proximity, but through patience, empathy, and unwavering respect for the journeys of those we hold dear. The weeks after the wedding were quieter than the celebration itself. The whirlwind of planning, anticipation, and emotional chaos had settled into an uneasy calm. Yet for me, the echoes of that text, "Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you," still lingered in my thoughts. I realized that the true challenge wasn't in attending the wedding. It was what came after. Life had a way of moving forward, whether I was ready or not. Ethan and Laura had returned from their honeymoon, settling into their new home, beginning routines and traditions that didn't require my input, but nonetheless existed alongside my love for my son. I watched from a distance, quietly supporting, carefully stepping back, learning how to honor both my heart and his choices. Each morning, I sat with a cup of tea and reflected. The feelings of hurt were still there, but they had softened into something more manageable, a quiet awareness rather than sharp pain. I considered the choices I had made, particularly the decision to remain silent after the wedding invitation, and I realized how much that had preserved not only my dignity, but also the possibility of future reconciliation. I thought about the meaning of boundaries. For years, I had believed that love meant constant presence, constant involvement, constant approval. But now I understood that true love could coexist with distance, that sometimes stepping back was the most profound expression of care. Small shifts in family dynamics began to emerge. Relatives who had observed the tension began to treat interactions with care, subtly acknowledging my position without causing further strain. Conversations were cautious but sincere. Invitations to casual family events came, though with polite notes indicating that my attendance would be appreciated but not expected. Even Ethan's behavior began to shift, in small but meaningful ways. Texts became more frequent, with updates about his work, Laura's new hobbies, or amusing anecdotes from their daily life. He wasn't fully open yet, but the door had been cracked, and for the first time since that shocking message, I sensed a path toward rebuilding connection. During this period, I discovered the depth of patience I was capable of. I learned that relationships cannot be rushed, that emotional wounds require time to heal, and that a parent's love can remain steadfast even when challenged. I also realized the importance of empathy. Laura, the woman who had once seemed like an obstacle, was a human being navigating her own fears, insecurities, and hopes for her marriage. Ethan's decision was not simply about rejecting me. It was about navigating loyalty, love, and the new life he had chosen. Understanding that allowed me to shift from resentment to a quiet compassion, even when the situation remained painful. One evening, I received a text from Ethan that surprised me. "Mom, Laura and I were talking. We realized we may have overreacted. Can we visit sometime this week?" My heart raced. It wasn't a full apology, and it wasn't an emotional confession, but it was a doorway. I replied cautiously but warmly, arranging a visit that would allow for gentle interaction, respect, and rebuilding of trust. The meeting was tentative at first. Laura greeted me with a polite smile, Ethan with a slightly nervous nod. But as the evening progressed, walls began to soften. Conversations flowed. Laughter returned in small doses, and I felt a fragile yet tangible connection beginning to re-establish itself. Through these moments, I understood a profound truth. Reconciliation does not demand immediacy. It requires respect for boundaries, time for reflection, and a willingness to meet halfway. My presence was no longer a threat. It was an expression of love tempered by understanding. I also recognized that forgiveness is not a single act, but a process. Healing, like any meaningful endeavor, unfolds gradually. By honoring this process, I maintained my dignity while allowing space for Ethan and Laura to adjust their perceptions and feelings. In the weeks and months that followed, subtle changes transformed the emotional landscape. Ethan began to confide more, sharing small victories and challenges. Laura grew more comfortable with my presence, acknowledging, without words, that love need not be monopolized, and that boundaries can coexist with connection. I discovered that the heartbreak, while painful, had taught me resilience, patience, and the power of quiet dignity. I had learned that love is not always about proximity or constant affirmation. Sometimes it is about presence, empathy, and the courage to respect the choices of those we cherish. Looking back, I realized that the journey was as valuable as the destination. That one text, initially so devastating, had become a catalyst for growth. It forced me to confront difficult emotions, reevaluate my approach to relationships, and recognize the importance of maintaining integrity and self-respect even when hurt. Ethan's message no longer felt like rejection. It felt like a turning point, a lesson in the complexity of human relationships, the nuances of love, and the strength that emerges when we face adversity with patience and grace. As life continued, my relationship with Ethan and Laura matured, shaped by new understanding, careful respect, and consistent love. I realized that family is not defined solely by presence or proximity. It is defined by empathy, patience, and the courage to honor boundaries while remaining emotionally available. The pain of that one text had not disappeared entirely, but it had been transformed into wisdom, resilience, and hope. I had endured heartbreak, preserved dignity, and found a path toward reconnection. A path that reminded me that love, in its truest form, often flourishes quietly, patiently, and with profound respect for the journey of others. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. Sometimes it's sudden, like a phone message that pierces your heart. Sometimes it's slow, creeping into your days, making you question your choices, your relationships, and even your own worth. The text from my son, "Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you," was both sudden and shattering. But over the months that followed, I came to realize that what felt like the end was really a beginning. After weeks of reflection, patient waiting, and careful observation, I began to see the contours of a new kind of relationship with Ethan and Laura. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real, grounded, and full of potential. One of the most important lessons I learned was about emotional resilience. When we are confronted with rejection, especially from someone we love deeply, our instinct is often to fight, argue, or withdraw completely. I allowed myself to feel the hurt fully, to cry, to sit in silence, and to acknowledge my emotions without judgment. But I didn't let those feelings dictate my actions. By choosing restraint and reflection over confrontation, I preserved my dignity and created space for healing. I realized that strength isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes strength is quiet, patient, and steady, and it can transform even the most painful experiences into opportunities for growth. Over time, small gestures of reconnection began to emerge. Ethan sent messages sharing everyday moments, small triumphs, and occasional struggles. Laura began to smile more freely in my presence, and the atmosphere of tension gradually gave way to something warmer, more familiar. I approached these interactions with care, never forcing closeness, never demanding acknowledgement. I listened, offered support, and allowed relationships to develop naturally. In doing so, I discovered that trust, once shaken, can be rebuilt, not overnight, but steadily, through consistency, patience, and empathy. One of the most profound lessons from this experience was about the nature of love and boundaries. Love does not require constant proximity or agreement. It does not demand control or affirmation. True love respects the autonomy of others, even when it hurts, even when it challenges our expectations. Boundaries, once seen as barriers, became tools for preserving relationships rather than destroying them. Respecting the choices of my son and his wife did not diminish my love. It strengthened it by demonstrating maturity, patience, and understanding. Beyond my relationship with Ethan, I discovered a deeper sense of self. I spent more time pursuing personal passions, reconnecting with hobbies, and exploring new interests. Long walks, creative projects, and quiet reflection became anchors in my life. Through these activities, I found joy independent of approval or inclusion. I learned that fulfillment comes not only from our roles as parents, friends, or family members, but also from honoring our own emotional and mental well-being. Ethan and I continued to rebuild our bond slowly. Occasional conversations, shared meals, and light-hearted texts became the foundation of a renewed relationship. I realized that a single moment of exclusion did not define our entire connection. Rather, it was part of the journey, a challenge that ultimately strengthened our understanding of each other. Laura, too, became an unexpected ally in this process. Her initial distance gave way to mutual respect, as she witnessed my patience, care, and consistent respect for their marriage. Our interactions became more comfortable, and over time, a genuine sense of family began to emerge. forgiveness, I learned, is not a one-time declaration. It is a process, a series of choices made over days, weeks, and months. It requires humility, self-awareness, and empathy. By forgiving without forgetting, by letting go of resentment while holding on to love, I reclaimed not only my relationship with Ethan, but also my peace of mind. I understood that holding on to hurt would not protect me or my child. It would only prolong suffering. Letting go, on the other hand, created space for healing, growth, and connection. Looking back, I realized that family is not only about celebrations, weddings, or shared spaces. It is about understanding, patience, and the ability to navigate conflict with grace. Family thrives when love is tempered with respect, when boundaries are honored, and when relationships are approached with empathy rather than expectation. That text, which once felt like a dagger to my heart, became a teacher. It taught me about the complexities of adult relationships, the power of emotional restraint, and the importance of patience in the face of hurt. Months after the wedding, life returned to a steady rhythm. Ethan and Laura were happy in their marriage, and I had found a sense of peace and strength I had never fully recognized before. Our interactions were not without occasional tension, but they were grounded in mutual respect and a growing understanding. I no longer defined my worth by inclusion in every family event or by constant affirmation from my son. I defined it by the integrity, patience, and love I carried within myself. I learned that true closeness does not require constant presence, that love does not demand control, and that sometimes, the most meaningful relationships are nurtured through understanding, empathy, and quiet resilience. Life will inevitably challenge us. It will test our patience, our love, and our capacity to forgive. But it is in these moments of trial that we discover our true strength. That one text, so brief yet so powerful, taught me that rejection does not have to define us. Heartbreak does not have to destroy us. And love, when practiced with respect and wisdom, endures in ways far deeper than proximity or ceremony could ever allow. My relationship with Ethan will continue to evolve, just as all human connections do. But I have learned that even after pain, growth is possible. Even after exclusion, love can persist. And even after heartbreak, resilience can emerge, quietly, steadily, and powerfully. Life has a way of teaching us the hardest lessons when we least expect them. That text from my son, "Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you," was one of the most painful moments I've ever faced. Yet, looking back now, I realize it was also one of the most transformative. It was a moment that forced me to confront my emotions, redefine my boundaries, and understand the deeper meaning of love, family, and patience. The weeks and months after the wedding were a mix of reflection, quiet endurance, and cautious hope. I had learned to navigate my feelings without letting them control me. Each day became a choice: to hold on to hurt or to release it, to demand acknowledgement or to offer understanding, to react with anger or to respond with patience. Slowly, deliberately, I chose the latter. I discovered the extraordinary power of silence. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, but in truth, it can be one of the strongest statements a person can make. By choosing not to confront, not to argue, and not to let my emotions erupt, I preserved my dignity and opened the door for meaningful communication in the future. In those quiet moments, I realized something profound. Love does not always demand words. Sometimes it exists quietly, patiently, and unwaveringly, waiting for the right moment to resurface. My love for Ethan had never diminished. It had simply taken a different form, a form that respected his choices and his new life. Over time, subtle signs of reconnection began to appear. A text here, a short conversation there, small gestures that spoke volumes. Ethan began to share pieces of his life, a new achievement at work, a funny story from his marriage, or an update about a small home project he and Laura had started. These moments, while brief, reminded me that the bond we shared could endure, even after the shock and pain of that text. Laura's demeanor also shifted over time. Her initial caution gave way to a gentle acknowledgement that my presence, while not always expected, was not a threat to their marriage. We found common ground in mutual respect, shared care for Ethan, and the understanding that family can grow in unexpected ways. Through this journey, I learned lessons I will carry for the rest of my life. Love is not possession. True love allows space, respects choices, and honors autonomy. Boundaries are not barriers. They are protective tools that safeguard relationships when handled with care. Forgiveness is a process. It does not happen instantly. It is cultivated over time through patience, empathy, and understanding. Resilience is built in adversity. The moments of heartbreak taught me strength, patience, and emotional maturity. Connection persists beyond conflict. Even when relationships face rejection, there is always the potential for healing, growth, and reconnection. These lessons reshaped my perspective not only on my relationship with Ethan and Laura, but also on life itself. I realized that love is less about control or approval and more about patience, understanding, and quiet steadfastness. During this period, I also discovered a new sense of self. I pursued hobbies and passions I had neglected, creating a life that was fulfilling independently of external validation. I walked daily, journaled, cooked, and even reconnected with friends I had drifted away from. Through these small yet intentional acts, I built a stronger foundation for my own happiness. I learned that fulfillment does not rely solely on family acceptance or participation in events. It comes from within, cultivated through resilience, reflection, and mindful living. Eventually, the subtle reconnection blossomed into a more consistent relationship. Conversations became easier, laughter returned, and moments of genuine care and understanding re-emerged. While the shadow of that text would never completely vanish, it had lost its power to define our relationship. Ethan and I began to engage more fully, recognizing the mutual respect that had developed over time. Laura also participated, creating a delicate but functional harmony within the family. This was not a perfect relationship, but it was authentic, resilient, and rooted in love that respected boundaries. Looking back, I understand now that the pain of that single message was transformative. It forced me to confront my deepest fears, rejection, irrelevance, and loss. And in doing so, revealed inner strengths I hadn't fully recognized. I learned that parenthood does not end with the wedding day. It continues in the form of guidance, love, patience, and sometimes quiet observation. Even when children make choices we don't fully understand, the love we hold for them remains, adaptive, patient, and resilient. I also realized that family is not solely defined by shared spaces, celebrations, or events. It is defined by mutual respect, empathy, and the willingness to navigate challenges with grace. To anyone facing rejection from a loved one, remember this: heartbreak does not erase the love you've given. Hurt does not diminish your value. And exclusion does not prevent the bonds of family from surviving, growing, and transforming over time. Life's most profound lessons often come through pain, disappointment, and conflict. They teach us resilience, patience, empathy, and the courage to love even when it is difficult. That single text, which once felt like the end of the world, became a beginning, a turning point that reshaped my understanding of love, family, and my own strength. As I continue forward, I carry these lessons in my heart. I know that relationships can be repaired, trust can be rebuilt, and love can endure, sometimes in ways quieter and more profound than I ever imagined. The journey has been painful, yes, but it has also been deeply illuminating, showing me that even after heartbreak, hope, healing, and connection are always possible. And so, the story ends not with anger or regret, but with understanding, growth, and the enduring power of love. The love that a mother carries for her child, unconditionally, patiently, and forever.